Welcome, everyone. It's a real privilege for me to welcome Professor Antonino Raffone in our MLE Friends series. My name is Gábor Kársai, Managing Director of Mind and Life Europe. Let me introduce our special guest tonight. Professor Raffone is a member of Mind and Life Europe and currently a professor at the Department of Psychology at Sapienza University of Rome, Italy, and a visiting professor and advisory faculty at Nalanda University, India. He is director of the Inter-University Center Econa at Sapienza University of Rome and president of Consciousness, Mindfulness, Compassion, CMC, International Association, and also chief editor of the specialty section on consciousness research of the journal Frontier in Psychology. So it's a real privilege for us to have you, Antonino, Professor Raffone, with us tonight. And we are really looking forward to your talk. And you can see the title of the talk today is Neuroscientific and Phenomenological Insights on Different Forms of Buddhist Meditation. Very interesting topic. Thank you so much for accepting the invitation.
Thank you so much, Professor Kársai. Gábor, it's really an honor, and I'm delighted to have this possibility to share about this topic of research. So, and then I'm going to share the screen. Okay, so it's really, I think, remarkable, the outstanding.
Just a little point. May you present the slides in the presenter's mode so that we can see?
Oh, thank you very much. Sure. So, thank you very much. Thanks for pointing this out. And so basically, it's remarkable to actually acknowledge the outstanding contribution of the Buddha in not only, of course, as for the great spiritual insights, liberating insights, and philosophical views, but also psychology in terms of psychological insights, which I think greatly resonate with contemporary developments in psychology and neuroscience, neurocognitive neuroscience, affective neuroscience, and neuroscience of consciousness. So, and I like to really share about this teaching of the Buddha. One of the great highlight about as the sea is pervaded by one taste, namely that of salt, in the same way my teaching is pervaded by one idea, that of freedom. So the idea of freedom is really a fundamental issue, and of course we might relate these to contemporary emphasis on flexibility, in psychological flexibility or cognitive flexibility, emotional flexibility, and self-flexibility, which will be some topics that will be highlighted in this talk. So really, I sometimes like to say to my students in psychology that the Buddha was really a great genius of psychology, besides other aspects. So, and since Gábor mentioned Nalanda University, you know that well before Bologna University in Italy, there were these ancient, wonderful, glorious universities in Asia, in India in particular. And one of these was Nalanda University, in actually where many great Buddhist, and not only Buddhist, scholars and philosophers were actually teaching. And it was actually an international university affecting, I think, so much the culture and many countries in Asia, and maybe also outside Asia. So it's really Nalanda University had a great role for the elaboration and transmission of core teachings about the mind and its liberation. And of course, talking about these great psychological insights of the Buddha and his followers practicing and teaching on these refined aspects, models of the mind, one of the most known and simple at the same time models is about the three poisons of the mind. Let's say greed, or craving, and hatred or aversion, and delusion. So you will see that when I will be talking about the study we have performed in our team about pain, the 2 arrows of pain actually, that these two aspects of the three poisons, namely aversion and delusion in the form of self-involvement and identification, play a role. And what is interesting is also you see these in a sense, co-arising, you could say, or of these three poisons, which are actually illustrated by these three animals that you see in this beautiful image, kind of psychoactive image. Okay, another very important model is the model of the 5 aggregates, no? The 5 khandhas or the 5 skandhas, which is actually maybe simplified in light of contemporary developments in psychology and neuroscience, yet it has outstanding insights, for example, in terms of the mutual influences between mind and body. So it's really a model of nama-rupa, mind-body. It's really highlights the interdependence between emotion and cognition, and also highlights the integrative role which is played by vijnana, which is consciousness, in the interplays or contact with the other groups of phenomena of the mind-body, like feeling tone, let's say categorization, and mental formations like emotions, motivations, mind states in general. And of course, body. And when body when we refer to the body, we should mean also the senses, what comes from the 5 senses. So, so I mentioned work in progress with an outstanding group in which I have been really honored and delighted to be involved, following an outstanding workshop in Leiden University in 2019 with Professor Sean Gallagher and others, really colleagues, estimated colleagues, neuroscientists, philosophers, and so on, to bridge the 5 aggregates view, that is really core aspects of the Buddhist psychology, with the pattern theory of self, which has been proposed by Sean Gallagher. In this moment, we are submitting our manuscripts, and so it's just to anticipate that probably some sharing and some publications around this topic will probably arise over the next months, or I don't know, maybe or maybe next year or whatever. This is a bit uncertain when the publication process will be complete. So, and another very refined model on which I will in particular emphasize in this talk is about Paticca Samuppada or Pratitya Samuppada, whether it is expressed in Pali or Sanskrit, about the dependent origination or codependent arising, which is really a model that is very refined about these processes that actually take place in time and that influence each other in a actually circular way. And interestingly, you see this slide comes from the work of Judson Brewer, Professor Judson Brewer and collaborators, and Garrison. It's really exploiting and actually relating to this model of the dependent origination as related to fundamental aspects of mechanisms in the brain about addictions, for example, of course linking also to contemporary notions in psychology and neuroscience, like basically conditioning and the idea of a self-related associative memory and so on. So I will return in particular to this model about this model of dependent origination with reference to pain, and a study that we have conducted with actually Buddhist monks. Okay, I have gladly to acknowledge the BIAL Foundation in Portugal for the generous funding of 2 projects of our team, one on the Aware Mind Brain project, and the following one on the advancements on the Aware Mind Brain project. The last one is the latter is still in progress, where really we have tried to bridge the streams of research on mindfulness meditation and consciousness, involve long-term virtuoso meditators, namely Theravada Buddhist monks and nuns, and involve multiple methods investigation, and to bridge theoretical and experimental studies with really having the possibility to work with an international team. And here is a beautiful photo of Amaravati Monastery. It's really a great Dhamma center near Oxford in the UK. And these are Thai Forest Theravada Buddhist monks and nuns following the tradition of Ajahn Chah and Ajahn Sumedho. Another beautiful photo of an associated monastery in Italy, actually, not far from Rome, is Santa Cittarama Monastery. Okay, now I would like to focus within this general framework on pain, the issue of pain, and actually on the 2 arrows of pain, according to the Buddhist model of the 2 arrows, according to which our pain is co-produced by, let's say, a sensory factor, we could say. We could call it like ascending or bottom-up from the senses, let's say, to the mind-brain, and also by an endogenous, mostly emotional or mind state related arrow or factor, which actually is co-produces with the sensory aspect, the pain experience. Obviously, we know now that pain is co-produced by obviously what comes from the senses, from the nerves, but also by endogenous factors like prior experiences, attention, expectation, mood, and so on. And obviously, when we look at the brain, we also have the idea of a matrix and of interdependent areas that actually produce an interplay of, in this actually brainweb for the pain experience, which includes, you can see, from bottom-up sensory factors coming from spinal cord, for example, going to brainstem, thalamus, so the lowest stations, then to regions like hippocampus, where also memories about pain experiences can come, actually can become involved. And then the amygdala, where strong, even possibly strong emotional reactions can take place. And cingulate cortex, where the element of self-involvement can play a role. Somatosensory cortex, insula, which integrates different types of these actually factors, let's say mind-brain factors. And so actually you can see that in most interactions between these brain areas involved in pain experience are bidirectional. So this fits pretty well with the idea of a 2-arrow co-production of pain. So according to the Buddha, just to remind that if someone is not trained in actually in awareness, not trained in mindfulness meditation, not trained in insight meditation, is subject usually to the action of the 2 arrows of pain. So it's like someone who is hit or shot by 2 arrows, not one bodily one, for example, and one mental one. Whereas someone who is trained through this contemplative training or methods is capable basically to just have 1 arrow, which is the physical or the sensory one, but not the endogenous or mental one. And you can imagine the implications for chronic pain and so on. Okay, obviously the literature about mindfulness and pain is has been enlarged over the years. And just to mention the great work by Fadel Zaidan and collaborators in the US, and also outstanding work performed by Dr. Antoine Lutz and collaborators in Lyon, in France, among others. Okay, and in this framework, also thanks to the opportunity to involve these long-term virtuoso meditators from the Thai forest Theravada tradition, we have performed a study, which is here you can see the, if you like, the subjective, or we can say phenomenological reports by these trained long-term meditators and by a matched group of short-term meditators. And this has been published recently in Mindfulness with, and this is a study by Valentina Nicolarti et al. So, and we are completing now manuscripts, articles, which actually have analyzed report studies on EEG, actually EEG and event-related potentials. But for actually for this talk, I will be highlighting the subjective or phenomenological reports. So basically, we contrasted the four forms of, let's say, 4 conditions: non-meditative rest, focused attention meditation with attention focused on the breath. This is often called samatha or shamatha meditation. Open monitoring meditation, also called choiceless meditation, where awareness is open to whatever arises in the present moment, and loving kindness meditation, or metta meditation. So in both groups, with both groups of long-term monastic meditators and short-term meditators. So how did so the study was actually included we used, let me say, an electrical stimulation, pain stimulation. And so we had to assess the subjective threshold, pain threshold of the participants, then calibrate the stimulus appropriately for the participant. And then we have the task, the actual task. And actually, in the actual task, the participants could switch between non-meditative rest, focused attention meditation, open monitoring meditation, and loving kindness meditation. So actually, after about 8.5 seconds with some jitter, they received they received the electrical stimulus, which was painful, moderately painful, and then interestingly, while they were there was recording of EEG, they had to report, provide the subjective experience reports on 3 dimensions of experience: pain, how much pain did you feel from 0 to 100? How much aversion did you feel from 0 to 100? And this is really the drive, the push to avoid the stimulus, and relates really pretty much well to the notion of aversion in Buddhist psychology. And then identification, to what extent you felt identified or self-caused in this particular experience. And these reports were actually took place on a trial-by-trial basis. So for each pain stimulation, they had to report these three dimensions, basically. Okay, so I don't go into the details of the analysis that we have performed, where in particular they highlight that the short-term meditators were in some ways the 3 forms of meditation had an influence on the experience, and in particular loving kindness meditation had an influence in both short-term meditators and long-term meditators. And what I would like to highlight, which is, I think, particularly relevant for the model of the 2 arrows of pain in Buddhist psychology, is that the aversion was predictive. This is through regression analysis. You see, the higher the aversion and the higher the expectation of pain in a particular phenomenological report by the participants. And also, the higher the identification, also the higher the pain that was reported by the participants. So our assumption, which I think is quite plausible, is that how much the aversion that the participants experienced was, and the identification that they experienced were both, in some sense, associated to the second arrow of pain, we could say the mental or endogenous arrow or factor of pain experience. By the way, in Buddhist psychology, pain corresponds to Vedana. No, it's the second skandha or group, and it is also in the map of the four foundations or applications of mindfulness. In the Satipatthana Sutta is listed as the second one as Vedana. And then we made some more refined data analysis called Granger causality analysis in the following way. So we actually, and this is what is produced as a resulting model for in our study, and I will illustrate this soon. Basically, what we did was to actually relate in terms of causal influence in the sense of Granger, which is these are causal models or causal analysis, which are also used, for example, in economics, to see to what extent the pain, aversion, and identification, which were experienced in a trial, were actually causally influencing the pain, aversion, and identification in the next trial stimulation. So it was a kind of, let's say, yeah, we could also say predictive or potential, if we use a framework, Husserlian framework of phenomenology. So, and actually, what we saw is that after the nociceptive painful input, pain, let's say, we can assume that pain, the first arrow of pain is illustrated actually in kind of black here in this model. So pain was causally influencing the aversion in the next trial. The aversion was causally influencing the identification in the next trial. And we can assume we didn't measure that out of this some behavioral output can arise. This is actually an inference, model inference. What we actually saw in our analysis is that, and this could be related, the white arrows can really be related to the second arrow of pain. So aversion was predicting pain, identification was predicting aversion, and pain as well, in a direct causal influence. So this pattern that you see here is the one in the long-term meditators under the assumption that they have enhanced mindfulness and introspective skills, but we found almost to a large extent overlap also with what was reported by the short-term meditators. So actually, if we relate our evidence, we can relate to the model of the 2 arrows of pain in Buddhist psychology, but we can also relate it to the model of the 12 nidanas, of the 12 links of dependent origination or codependent arising, paticca samuppada or pratidya samuppada. For example, you might see here, this is contact, is phassa in Pali, sparsha in Sanskrit, pain is vedana, aversion is tana, trishna, in a sense, obviously, in the side of aversive side of things, not the side, of course, of greed. Aversion, aversion is the, excuse me. Identification can be related to upadana, which is actually the etymological meaning of this is fueling. It's a kind of fueling. It's also translated as appropriation, which anyway can fit pretty well with the idea of identification, or as Professor Judson Brewer will say, will be kind of also a memory, associative memory, self-related associative memory. And behavior could be related to bhava, then the next link. So we have the 5 links, which are from the 6th link, 7, 8, 9, 10 link of the 12 nidanas in the model of dependent origination. So it's quite striking, at least we need to be cautious, of course, we need to more studies, but in a sense, there seems to be promise to link this possibility to take direct insights from Buddhist psychology models, core Buddhist psychology models, and in controlled experimental conditions, so perform subjective report studies or phenomenological report studies, also in combination with neuroscientific third-person measures, and of course, also reminiscent of the great emphasis on neurophenomenology by Francisco Varela. And then I would like to mention some other investigations that we have really performed with the outstanding participation of the Theravada Buddhist monks and matched control, group of short-term meditators. We can say this was a study by Manna et al. Published in 2010, but where we contrasted the samatha meditation, focused attention meditation of the breath with a non-meditative rest condition, and also with more vipassana-like meditation, which was choiceless meditation or open awareness meditation. So an important highlight of the study was that we observed a widespread deactivation patterns that you can see in blue here. You can also read the names of these areas if you are interested. And we saw a particular involvement of the left hemisphere in these modulations, and also some specific activations, especially in anterior cingulate cortex and right anterior prefrontal cortex. Also, we found in contrasting open monitoring, let's say, vipassana meditation with a non-meditative rest, a more focused set of areas, which mostly involve areas in the left hemisphere, once again, and in particular in superior temporal gyrus, superior parietal lobule, and medial anterior prefrontal cortex. So the suggestion from this evidence is of a particular evidence of the left hemisphere in this kind of meditation-related modulations of brain activities in the long-term meditators. So this led us to formulate what we call a brain theory of meditation, BTM, which of course doesn't mean that we endorse by all means a reductionistic framework, which I think is quite untenable. But really was really to highlight in the brainweb, as Francisco Varela will say, or resonant assemblies in the brain that can be related or a part of a pattern of phenomenological and neural pattern of different forms of Buddhist meditation. So just to give an idea of some highlights of this BTM, it highlights the interplay of brain networks and integrated brain states in meditation, suggests some brain mechanisms of focused attention meditation, which highlight in particular also this deactivation of brain areas. Because if you think the literal meaning of samatha or shamatha is quiescence of the mind, and so it will make quite sense to have a prominent pattern of deactivation in the brain. Although several studies have mostly focused on the activation part. And then the brain mechanisms of open monitoring meditation, which highlight in particular the left hemisphere, higher order associative areas in the left hemisphere. The theory also suggests a differentiation of the brain mechanisms of focused attention meditation and open monitoring meditation, suggests brain mechanisms of loving kindness meditation, and as related to that, compassion meditation, highlights a left brain dominance for top-down regulation in meditation, and enhanced interhemispheric integration in meditation states and traits. The highlights implications for consciousness theories, and actually emphasizes a meta function of brain regulation and flexible resource allocation related to mindfulness, and also highlights some directions for a further development of the theory. So it's still in a preliminary stage. And let me highlight one aspect which we think is of relevance, especially for further investigation, that you can see here, this is a classic work in neuroscience about the cost of cortical computation by Peter Lenny, which actually highlights that in the cerebral cortex, at any time in a given task, only 1% of the neurons can be activated to a certain extent for actually for metabolic costs. So our cerebral cortex and our brain, human brain, is really subject to severe neuroenergetic limitations. So also the brain has to deal with energetic limitation issues. So basically, for this reason, we believe, and this is just at the moment hypothetical, that the brain meditation may actually support a reorganization through structural and functional neuroplasticity of the brain, such that the brain works more efficiently in terms of in neuroenergetic terms. And we have hypothesized that this is related in particular to the so-called alpha rhythm in the EEG. It is a rhythm between 8 and 12 cycles per second. It's very important. And you can see, sorry, the slide is not very clear, but you can see in red, this is the peak of alpha in frontal, in different electrodes, actually, EEG electrodes from central posterior. In the long-term meditators, the monks in red, and the controls, you can see this huge difference on average. And also, to more specifically, when we look, this is EEG study, we consider an anterior electrode and a more posterior electrode. We have a condition of rest, focused attention meditation, open monitoring meditation, loving kindness meditation. In red, it's the long-term meditators, the monastics. In black is the control group of short-term meditators. What you see is that actually there is in particular a difference in anterior areas, and this is called anteriorization of the alpha rhythm, which we think is particularly related to a better capacity to regulate actually cognition and emotion in possibly also in an energetically efficient way for the brain of those who have committed themselves to basically to long-term meditation, to the Dhamma, and integrating also ethics and wisdom factors in their lifestyle. And then one of the other highlights of our projects, both empirically and theoretically, is the actual highlight on the function of three major, let's say, central brain networks, like default mode network, saliency network, executive network, which are also emphasized by other authors, influential authors like Iwan Tang, Antoine Lutz, and others. Obviously, there are more networks, brain networks involved in meditation, but these three networks seems to be really, in some sense, play a central orchestrating role in cognitive, emotional activities, and I think can be pretty nicely related to the notion of the 5 aggregates in Buddhist psychology. And so this is a work in progress with Roberto Guidotti et al. At the Institute of Advanced Biomedical Technologies in Chieti, in Italy. It's a MEG study with magnetoencephalography. And what we have done is basically selecting some hubs or nodes of these 3 central brain networks that you can see here, anterior cingulate cortex, right, frontoinsular cortex, this is saliency network, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, right, posterior parietal cortex, this is a central executive network, PCC, and which is actually the default mode network, which relates in particular to the self. And so without going to the details, what you see here is the coupling, the oscillatory coupling between within these networks and between these networks. in different bands, like a delta band, which is the slowest one, 0 to 4 cycles per second, theta band, 4 to 8 cycles per second, alpha band, we mentioned this before, 8 to 12 cycles per second, beta band from actually 13 to maybe 25 cycles per second, and gamma band, which is the fastest actually band. Actually, you see here that when the colors approach in this scale, normalized scale, this actually red and actually deeper levels in this color scale, they express high coupling of these oscillatory coherence of these oscillatory signals in this band. And when they go toward blue and yellow, obviously the signal is, the coupling, oscillatory coupling is reduced. So I don't go into the details, but please have a look just by visual inspection to what how does it look, how it looks, when they go from rest, non-meditative rest, these are the monks, just the trained long-term meditators, to samatha, focus attention meditation on the breath. You can see it's a huge pattern change in the pattern of coupling, in the sense of decoupling in most of these bands, like delta, theta, beta, gamma. And in alpha, this is less pronounced. So our interpretation that in alpha band, they keep basically most of the couplings within this central brain networks, because in alpha, there is probably more likelihood to have an efficient regulation of any emotional reactions arising and any cognitive, for example, judgments that can arise. So our idea basically is that this mechanism can be related to the entanglement and disentanglement of the 5 aggregates, which is taught, for example, in Vipassana meditation, phenomenologically speaking, obviously. And this might be a brain correlate involving 3 core central brain networks. And also same pattern is found also for Vipassana-like or open monitoring meditation. So basically this evidence has inspired us also in this case in a study. It's a systematic review or critical review on autobiographical memory and mindfulness, published recently in the journal Mindfulness with Evangelina Dominguez and Maria Casagrande, where really we have highlighted that the evidence in literature about the effects of mindfulness meditation on autobiographical memory can be related to 3 forms of flexibility, which you can find displayed also here. This is another diagram of a model that we are developing with Yuan Tang and Narayana Srinivasan about the effects of mindfulness meditation in terms of cognitive flexibility, self-referential flexibility, and emotional flexibility through the involvement of these 3 major brain networks and the interplay of areas within them and between them, like silence network, also with the role of higher order regulation, central executive network, and default mode network. And yes, this could be related to the wonderful highlight by the Buddha on the freedom. No, you remember this from which we have actually started this presentation. And I would like to conclude with this beautiful picture of collaborators, great collaborators who have given important contribution to these studies, especially to the BILE project, like Professor Peter Malinowski, Liverpool John Moores University, Alessandro Gianandrea, Federica Mauro, Luca Simeone, Patrizia Garberi, Professor Liliana Jordanova, and Professor Vasil Kolev from Bulgarian Academy of Sciences, Dr. Domenico Scaringi, Dr. Robert Brumarescu, and also Professor Henk Barendrecht, Radboud University. And so I am mostly grateful to them and many more. Really, if a photo should have been including all the persons that have contributed to these projects, I think I would have been really quite interesting and nice. And so I thank you very much, very much for your kind attention. Thank you very much.
We would really like to thank Professor Raffone for this wonderful, deep, extensive, really detailed presentation about your and your colleagues' work. It was really fantastic, rich, very rich in content. So I hope that we are going to unpack many little details here and there with great, interesting questions from our friends here, MLE Friends. So I would like to open up the floor for questions. Either you indicate it via raising your hand or with that little icon in the reactions, or just indicating that in the chat. While waiting maybe for the first few questions, I would just ask one, I would say, a little technical type of question. You talked about the dependent co-origination model, and then you also showed the double arrow process between the sensory data and then the identification in the other end. And you mentioned that these two models reflect something similar. And I was wondering whether you have ever drawn a diagram or a picture which would show the two models kind of matching or relating to each other.
Wow, it's a wonderful suggestion. Yeah, that is very nice. No, I think not so far, but will be very nice to think of this.
Yeah, because it has a lot of potential, I think, and I found your interpretation really fascinating, really fascinating.
Thank you. And so maybe we can talk more about this, Gabor. I mean, with your knowledge in the field of Buddhist philosophy and studies, I think it's a really fascinating aspect.
Thank you. So, questions. Aude Cardona.
Hello, and thank you so much for your talk. As you can hear, I have a voice virus.
Oh, sorry.
So I'm sorry about that. Thank you so much. It was so fascinating. I am so deeply interested by the subject. I will start by a very specific question. I saw in one of your slides that you had auditory cortex in one of your long-term meditators. I found that very intriguing. Would you mind developing?
Absolutely. Thank you for your observation. It was actually strikingly was the primary auditory cortex, area A1. So it means that the long-term meditators could even down modulate the activity of primary auditory cortex. So since this was a fMRI study, and they were meditating, you know, there is this noise that is in the fMRI. So I suppose that when they went to the samatha meditation, to the focused attention meditation on the breath, they could down-regulate even the activity of a primary auditory cortex, probably to manage more this ongoing sound noise of the fMRI. This is what we thought. But this truly shows that when you have such, let's say, a long-term training, you can really arrive to this lower level modulation of the, if you like, the doors of perception, you could say. No, it's a kind of perceptual consciousness. So thank you for noticing this. Or sensory consciousness, you could say, the sensory consciousness. This also reminds some models in Abhidharma, like the 8 consciousnesses by Yogacara school, or Vasubandhu, where actually there is a distinction between the sensory consciousnesses and the actual mental consciousness. And then there is a self-consciousness, which is called manas. And possibly the idea is that through these advanced stages of meditation, you can possibly even have access to the modulation of the sensory consciousnesses.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks.
While waiting for some other questions, just a little, again, short one. You mentioned long-term meditators several times in your presentation. What would you consider long-term?
Thank you. Indeed, it's relative. It's really relative. We use this this term, and because I think on average they are really thousands of hours of practice of meditation, which was also varied within the group of meditators, and so really probably we should call them as maybe. Either virtuoso meditators or really very long-term meditators. So it was just a label, but obviously we have to remark that is relative. No, someone else could consider long-term meditators, someone who has considerably less hours of expertise. Thank you for raising this issue. It's very, very important to contextualize and relativize our formulation.
Thank you. Andrew Crisson.
Oh, Professor, hello. My name is Miranda. Andrew is actually hello.
Yes.
Hello. Hello.
Andrew is actually my husband.
Hello.
Look, I'm a psychologist, and forgive me, the depth of my knowledge of Buddhist teaching is really quite poor. But as a neuropsychologist and a practicing performance psychologist, this is very interesting work to me. I'm really curious, however, and as I said, please forgive my ignorance. The concept of identification, I wasn't clear exactly how you were operationalizing identification, and that may well be as a reason, my poor knowledge of the Buddhist side of things. But I do a lot of work with identification, and I'm really curious as to how you operationalized it and how that works within the framework.
Thank you very much for the question. It's a very important one, and actually we had to make sure that especially the so-called short-term meditators had a clear understanding of this. This was in somewhat more easy with the long-term monastic meditators, and what our idea was really feeling caught by, in this experience of pain, the sense of self-involvement, the sense of, this was our idea, that you might experience also as a kind of tension, the tension in your body. So I think this is one of the important points that needs to be made sure that there is uniform understanding by the participants, and but I agree with you that is a bit more difficult to explain that pain. What is the pain that you feel, or the aversion that you feel? The aversion in the sense how much you feel to have a drive to avoid, to this particular actual experience. And with the identification is really this feeling of feeling caught by, this particular experience.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Thank you. It's an important question, and we think that it has been important through our study to really highlight the importance to investigate this aspect, also to obviously to refine investigation, maybe also the definition, and to see, because this is very important aspect in mindfulness meditation, insight meditation practices, the idea of diffusion, of actually non-identifying with the experience. This can be very important in relating to pain, whether we really identify or with pain or not. make a huge difference.
That's fantastic. That's really, really helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
David McMurtry.
Thanks, Gabor. And thank you, Professor Raffone, for your talk. You mentioned, sorry, is that me because of the music?
Yes, a little bit, just a little bit.
One second, I'll switch it off. Let me ask my question.
Please.
Professor Raffone, you mentioned Professor Jackson Brewer's associative learning habit loop. Would you say that mindfulness or meditation allows you to break out of the habit loop?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very good question. Thank you very much. It's very, I think, bright, the schematization by Jackson Brewer and Garrison about really this habit loop mechanism. And the assumption is that, as we know also from the practice and the phenomenology of, for example, insight meditation, that our self, in a sense, is made up of these habit loops, no? So we have these kinds of conditionings, let's say. In Vipassana, these are called mind objects, or they are called also, a kind of afflictive coalitions, no? In a sense of processes. For example, when we are stuck in some addictions, whatever. So the idea is that from one side, there is the actual inertia of the mechanism of addiction to repeat itself. So we might also think of Freud, no? The coaction, compulsion to repeat, for example. And the idea is that part of this is really due to the fact that we have repeated so many times these habit loops that they have become in some sense ingrained. And on the other hand, they have become a part of ourselves in a sense. We have been through this mechanism of, let's call it associative memory or a self pattern, as Sean Gallagher will say. So part of the problems is to let go, to use this term that is often used in contemplative practice, letting go, is that we are really identified in a sense in a more structural way, not only in terms of a state of identifying with this particular experience of pain, but our structure, self-structure, is really made up in some sense as disentanglements of reactions, judgments, self-use, whatever, which is not that easy to disentangle. So to disentangle them, we need really what is called this clarity, this clear vision, no? It's the literal meaning of Vipassana or Vipassana, to really see through these mechanisms. And of course, we need the appropriate setting, the appropriate, let's say, introspective setting or phenomenological setting, really to reveal this phenomena also before this habit loop or entanglement mechanisms.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Again, while waiting for some more questions, yeah, Ruben, please, Ruben Flores.
Hi, Gabor. Thank you. Just a question about the just a very interesting talk. Thank you very much for that. Just wondering about your work with Nalanda University. I'm not sure if you could share with us a little bit of this.
I'm very happy to share. There is an outstanding project in India, supported by the government of India, actually that has, in a sense, to there has been the foundation of International University of Nalanda called Nalanda University. This is the name. It's International University. It is actually in Bihar. It is in Rajgir and not in the actual Nalanda itself, but close to Nalanda. And it's a project that really is supported by different countries, different nations, and really aims to support, from one side, the study of the philosophy of Buddhism and other contemplative traditions and their ancient philosophical foundations, as well as also there is emphasis on studies on peace studies, and very much important is on the ecology, the campus, the new campus of the university, which is reminiscent of the glorious, beautiful campus of the ancient Nalanda University, has been really constructed, built based on emphasis on ecological issues. And I'm sure that this project will beautifully develop over the next years.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking.
Maybe more Aude again, please.
Well, unless somebody else has a question, I can wait.
No, please go on. Please go on.
Okay. So your talk was so rich that I'm just choosing particularly the subject of emotional reactivity. And so in the case of pain, I was wondering how you were measuring emotional reactivity, and if you were measuring emotional reactivity in a different context, would you look at different, for example, brain networks? So I'm curious. I know it's a very large question, but...
Very important one. Thank you very much. And really the issue of reactivity, I remember the great teacher Stephen Batchelor mentioning that the cause of suffering related to the second noble truth in Buddhism was really reactivity, in a sense, no? And so it's really a relevant issue. And perhaps our study on the pain seems to suggest that there are two important layers of this reactivity, one of which is really a proper, let's say, emotional reactivity, which is this aversion in this case. Obviously, pain is unpleasant experience, and unpleasant experience actually causes the aversion, to avoid it or to eliminate it. And then there is another aspect of the reactivity, which is probably takes place with some time lag, and this I think can be usefully investigated by the methods of neuroscience, affective neuroscience, on the identification, and this could be related to a self reactivity or self-related reactivity. This could be a way to think of this in terms of the model of actually dependent co-origination. There are 3 steps which are actually Vedana, which is just the experience of, if you like, valence. It's an experience of unpleasant, let's say. It's unpleasant. This caused, let's say, also by the first arrow. Maybe also with some level of arousal, of activation that comes at that level. Then there is Tana, in sense of Trishna, of here in the form of aversion, which is the emotional reactivity, maybe involving amygdala or whatever. And then there is the limbic network, so to speak. And then there is the self-related reactivity or identification or upadana, if we interpret it in that way. And this can be 3 different moments or 3 different processes in this reaction chain. It's actually a reaction chain in our body mind, namarupa. And it is interesting that Ajahn Navarro has interestingly written an article published in Mindfulness, emphasizing this momentary interpretation of the dependent origination, actually, model. Because this you will know better than me, has been interpreted in many different ways, in different time scales, and so on. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed. You mentioned not only the importance of meditation and mindfulness, but also the other two crucial Buddhist aspects of life, wisdom and ethics, prajna and shila. I'm really interested in your personal view or your personal opinion, because we tend to focus too much on meditation. How do you see the links between these three domains? And we know the influence of meditation on our brain structure, as you have also summarized that, and also the various forms of meditation's influence on our brain structure. But it would be really nice at one point later, maybe in several decades' time, to also investigate how wisdom and ethics can affect maybe not only our brain, but also our whole embodied being and our biological structure, or who we are as human beings. So I'm just curious and interested in your personal opinion about the importance of wisdom and ethics as well.
Thank you very much, Gabor, for raising this fundamental issue, which relates, of course, to the Noble Eightfold Path and the fundamental teachings of the Buddha. And it's remarkable. I remember once I was giving a talk in Amaravati Monastery, so with the community of monks and nuns and others in the Sangha there, with Ajahn Amaro was there, he's the abbot there. And he asked, he observed, I think he said, if you don't work on ethics, on Shila as well, your reptilian brain will be too fast and too strong to react to any kind, of input that you can hardly, by only meditation or intensive meditation training, be capable to override, this reactivity, this emotional reactivity, which is really in the programmed in the depth of our brain, starting from really the brainstem and so on, the motivational systems there. So the idea to use more aspects of training makes a lot of sense in light of how much we tend to enact in our life, daily life, distressing life, some habit loops, which of course means that they also are, the neuroplasticity works also in two directions, so to speak, wholesome and unwholesome. So we can meditate, but if we react and enact in our way unwholesome, akusha mind states, and put them in reactivity, in actions, then this means that we are reinforcing some habit loops synaptically, in terms that, of course, will have more probability to be reactivated given similar situations. So I think it makes a lot of sense to work through the wisdom element is very important logically also, because mindfulness or sati is assumed to be non-judgmental. This is fair enough. Let's think of John Kabat-Zinn definition. We need to be non-judgmental and see what is there and non-judgmentally. But then we have also to be capable through the, and this links to the right discernment and to the actual wisdom element, to have the right discernment of which mind states are wholesome, healthy, and which are unwholesome or unhealthy. So, and this is why perhaps this idea of working with in the mental training, in bhavana, through the not only meditation, but also through the wisdom and ethics cultivation is crucial. And indeed, what we have seen in our studies is that some of the most, let's say, I say spectacular effects in the brain waves and activities of the monastics were really at the trait level. So they were not so much modulated by the type of meditation, but they were really, it was really a trait difference between the let's say, the monastics or long-term meditators and the control group. So, and this probably is due to really the integration of mental training factors of meditation and actually wisdom and ethics. And this is, I fully agree with you that is really a frontiers, an important frontiers for future to be investigated. Thank you very, very much for Gabor for really raising this.
Thank you. Annie Bloch.
Well, I think this is fascinating and basic.
Thank you.
But this is, anyway, it's the world where kind of technical definition of meditation and technical Buddhist, there's a match. That's wonderful. But meditation is, he says, a technical thing, but practice is something wider than a set of meditations. And it's much more difficult to approach because where do, for instance, Tibetan practitioner, somebody who has done, for a Westerner, there's some people who have done three-year retreats. I'm supposed that for you, these are virtuous long-term practitioners. Okay, what can you say? And they have techniques which are very different. So it would be interesting to study their brains. And then that's another frame of reference. And for me, there's also a biological frame of reference, which is not just the brain. This kind of, I don't know, so much, as if cognitive science was brain science, okay? And if I take a very simple approach, pain is also a biological signal. And it signals that you should pay attention to something. And in the biological approach, which is valid also, it's complementary. When I feel pain, I'm looking at what message is there, and pain is there, and then the pattern behind is fight, flee, and freeze. And this is valid too. And in terms of practice, in terms of development as a human being, this is, I'd say, more basic and more practical. So I feel it's just not to forget that, because we're animals, That's all.
Thank you very much, and for raising this. I would say these are broad issues, of course, demanding deep reflections, and but really important. So obviously, when we have in contemplative science, we should in some way simplify, the phenomena that we study, and of course. It's important to have awareness of this simplification and that we are simplifying. It is very, very, very important. So, and obviously when we consider, let's say, Buddhist meditation and Tibetan Buddhist meditation with so many remarkable practices and say mantra meditation and the visualization and non-dual awareness meditation, and it's not that easy to have, this pattern of findings and let's call them operationalizations, together.
You're back.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
So you repeat the last part, please.
Gladly. So the idea is that because we have different forms of meditation, not only, let's say, to simplify with focused attention meditations, and we have also open monitoring, so on. We have meditation based on, for example, non-dual awareness meditation has been studied remarkably by Josipovic, for example. That is very, very interesting. Then there is obviously compassion meditation, and compassion meditation, we have different practices for compassion. So to some extent, I think it's it's important to find a way to, from one side, to simplify, and from the other side, to try to reflect upon the fact that we are simplifying in this way, the other way, and there are, there are a broader set of practices. And I think contemplative science is really going to really work on this to improve the way. And then this is why we need to work also in good taxonomies, no? And one of these that has, for good reasons, had an important impact is the one proposed by Dahl and collaborators et al. In 2015, distinguishing between attentional forms of meditation, deconstructive forms of meditation, and constructive forms of meditation. So I think we should really try to work and refine more and more these, reflect on these taxonomies, and always keep in awareness that we are simplifying, obviously, something that is much, much, much broader. And about the brain, I think Francisco Varela has beautifully taught us that, shown and that inspired us to that it's possible to study the brain activity in a non-reductionistic way, but still in connected, actually in a pattern with the phenomenology, actually. No? So in first and third person, person perspectives integrated in the same setting. And obviously, this requires also some developments of methods for this. For example, having good methods when we study the brain waves associated to events, to like pain stimulation, not only by averaging through many responses, but really having methods that study on a experience by experience basis and actually relate these experiences with the brain dynamic brain activity. And Sean Gallagher, a phenomenologist, also working with whom I have really appreciated collaborating, and to collaborate is really interestingly think in terms of pattern view, such that there is the brain, but there are also activities of the autonomic nervous system, the hormones, and these form a pattern with our emotional experiences, with the feelings, with our cognitions, and so on. I think this is probably the right way also to interpret the 5 khandhas or skandhas, no? The 5 aggregates in as related to Buddhist psychology. But definitely we should not follow into the trap of reductionism, and also thinking that the brain in isolation actually makes sense.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, besides the first person phenomenological perspective, Francisco also emphasized the embodied notion of the mind, the brain as well, of course. So
embodied and active, and this obviously goes well beyond this idea of the brain.
Yes.
Thank you.
But as you said, we need to start somewhere, and I think what we have covered in Mind and Life type of dialogues and activities over the last 3.5 decades was just the beginning. And your research shows that we can gain a lot of insights in that with that research already, and this is just a tiny little first part of the whole endeavor that we need to continue doing, as we have already discussed, including wisdom, including ethics, including the whole embodied notion of the brain and the mind, and how our guts and how our other aspects of our being relate to these notions that you are investigating. And you can do what you can do in this period of time, and there will be a lot of students following that up and extending the scope of research, I'm sure, in the coming decades. So we have a lot of other things to do.
Very beautiful phrase. So thank you, Gabor.
Bruce Bao posted a longer question or reflection in the chat. May I invite you, Bruce, to share this publicly and ask your question maybe in a more succinct way. Of course, there may be something you want to elaborate before you ask the question, but it's a very interesting one. So please.
Thank you very much, Gabor. And in fact, it's a direct continuation of what you and Dr. Raffone have just been talking about. It is the bringing together of neuroscience and Buddhism that His Holiness and Francisco Varela started the process of 35 years ago. And in fact, His Holiness, when talking about Francisco, reminds us that there were times in the conversation when Francisco would say, now my neuroscience hat and now my Buddhist hat, because there were difficulties in correlating the two. He tells that story with a great love of Francisco. So actually, Dr. Raffone, I was actually interested in your two hats as have come out in this talk today. I know you're the chief editor of the specialty section on consciousness research of Frontiers in Psychology, in which you use the term, or as editor, you're involved in the use of the term consciousness in the Western psychological sense as subjective experience of being aware with its two dimensions, access to information, and the phenomenal or subjective personal quality of an experience. And of course, we've been talking about meditation as a meta-awareness, a state of deliberate attention towards the contents of conscious thought. Serving as an appraisal of experiential consciousness. Whereas the Buddhist conceptualizations of consciousness are varied, and you've used them in a number of senses today, differ very significantly from this Western understanding of the term consciousness. And I would suggest that it's perhaps not readily cross-culturally interchangeable, and that we do have to be careful in our conversations, bringing science and Buddhism together, that we don't switch between different definitions of consciousness. You've given us a number of examples of Buddhist definitions of consciousness that have to relate to your work. I'd be very interested to know where you feel the research you've described to us today fits into the Western understanding of consciousness as conscious lived experience.
Thank you very much. I think also nicely, actually, you nicely summarized the important areas of really highlight and discussion in contemporary science of consciousness. And there is also, as related to the Buddhist models, the Buddhist psychology, there is the element of consciousness as interestingly being regarded as one of the 5 aggregates we were discussing. So in a sense, it is part of this, if you like, phenomena or processes which are in interplay with each other, so subjects to causes and conditions. So and there is a different word for mindfulness, for example, no, which is sati. So one is vijnana or vijnana, and other is sati. So there is a clear distinction between the two, and whether this can be related to meta-awareness, as you say, no, and the actual consciousness can be related more to this access component. Then maybe we might have another layer which is more sensory related, which probably could be related to some notions of phenomenal consciousness, but then the point is that these how we look at these notions depend on the actual framework, conceptual framework that you use, whether you use a phenomenological approach or whether you use, for example, an approach which depends more on philosophy of mind and so on. So I think there are still different positions in this debate. So even when we talk about contemporary, science of consciousness, we have different really angles that can be considered. Probably the phenomenology-based one, which might be related to Husserl and also to Varela, to Francisco Varela, and also Sean Gallagher has been doing interesting things. Is I think probably the most the one that can be more closely connected with the Buddhist psychology notions.
So in a sense, you're saying that people are debating from different conceptual assumptions or linguistic bases, and obviously what we've been working for over the last 35 years is to share our lived experience and not to argue about our different conceptualizations.
Indeed, then there are no problems if we just relate. I mean, if we go to the direct experience, and yeah, it's true. But then also it is interesting to work on relating to conceptualizations. Is also very, very, I think, very, very interesting work. So, but for example, I have been using for some time the framework of net block, the distinction between phenomenal and access consciousness. And then by interacting with Sean Gallagher and so knowing more about the phenomenological approach, I have appreciated also some differences and limitations of the first approach. So really, I think it's really a matter, we should probably develop more work in this direction.
Yes, you did mention the access consciousness in passing in one of your slides. I noticed that as, again, a slightly different conceptualization of the Western view of conscious lived experience. I mean, we've been talking about some practices, the Samatha and Vipassana, and of course, originally, the Buddha didn't describe them as separate forms of meditation. He actually described them as states of mind, which were in a continuum. So when we start to use language to conceptualize, to take us further away from the experience, we actually lose some of the benefits of meditative experience, or meditative practice, I should say, which is an opportunity to bring somebody else to the experience that we have had. I mean, this is the reason why we pass on meditative practice.
Absolutely, absolutely, very, very important.
Yeah, so again, you know, the further away we go down different tributaries, as in science and Buddhist psychology, shall we say, we finish up arguing about different conceptualizations rather than working towards a shared experience. So
true, that is true. But then I think we need maps. We need maps, and these maps, for example, are useful in meditation. These, for example, in Vipassana meditation, in insight meditation, having these maps is very, very useful to organize the actual observation. And so I think they have their purpose. They are categorizations of phenomena, and but they can really be useful to then at the given point we should really let go of them, and really rely on the direct experience. But I think they serve their function. And indeed, in Buddhist psychology, there are actually in the inclusion there, there is the highlight also on the Abhidharma as one of the canonical actually the canonical scriptures. So, and we have also refined maps. The Buddha has given so many lists of for us to consider, no? And that is, I think, that they are just they have their function. They are instrumental.
The Amitabha, and as taught by the Theravada tradition, is very much the psychological aspect of the Buddha's teachings, whereas a second level of teaching, which should be considered more mystical and associated with compassion, came later, and is the focus of His Holiness's teachings, for example, in the Gelugpa tradition. So we must be aware also of the different traditions of Buddhism and the different definitions of things like mindfulness within Buddhism. And I noticed earlier you switched between examples of non-dual and dual experience. And again, we've got a lot of different states here. Perhaps the best way we should be going forward, and Gabor, you might like to think of this, is to actually expand our perspective so that we're not just talking about neurophenomenology, we're not just talking about first person, third person, and perhaps not even just talking about inaction, but maybe we need to go beyond and look at the basic assumptions in the conceptualizations of the branches of contemplative science that have developed. And we have already started to develop our own subdivisions with their own assumptions, in which people talk to others within their group. And maybe we need to go back to having a broader conversation which goes beyond this, and also out into anthropology, as Evan Thompson has suggested, and into the wider cultural basis on which this is included. And this obviously would include Whitehead and some of the philosophical mystical traditions. So maybe there's a thought there for Mind and Life Europe going forward after they finish their inactive program. Anyway, thank you very much for
Thank you for your very interesting comments and really vision.
Thank you for the suggestion, Bruce. This is fascinating, really. And I can tell that we have been exploring not only pathways that we have that you have observed recently, but indeed bringing together much wider perspectives in dialogical forms and also in events and future activities. What we know for sure is that we can't cover all streams of knowledge and those streams of science and those streams of contemplation and those streams of even philosophy. So the previous dialogue you have just had, of course, gave me the idea to suggest more systematized work and even publications, because we are so much focused on very specific areas here and there. So at one point, it would be really nice to see an overarching work on what we have been exploring and achieved over the decades of work. Not we meaning this whole network of scientists, researchers, practitioners, philosophers, because it would be really fascinating to see all that in a systematized overarching frame, and that could include all those things that you suggested, Bruce.
No, I'm very happy to collaborate with you on that if you wish.
Yeah, wonderful. And what is fascinating is that such an idea that you have just suggested came up in a dialogue with Professor Raffone, who has dived deep into some really specific subject that we have heard about today. So it was an example of a deep dive into something very concrete and very specific. And as you mentioned, very, very simplified in a way. I mean, the territory of research is simplified, but you brought a very wide scope of understanding and interpretation into your summary as well, including the whole history of Buddhist thinking and other dimensions of Buddhism besides meditation. And that was the reason why this idea that Bruce has just mentioned could come up in a context. So that shows your wide understanding and knowledge as well, not only the very specific one. So it's a great representation of what is Mind and Life about.
Yes, I think so. I think Mind and Life has done some wonderful work, and of course supported a wonderful focus point research work, as we've heard today and in earlier Friends talks. But at the same time, we don't want to, as we said at the start of the year, where we want to push the edges into horizons and allow the horizons to expand into each other, and not to remain as limiting horizons. Sometimes we need to get out of the specific room we're in, where we're staring at the ceiling, and then we can reach for the stars.
Thank you. So let me give you the floor back, Antonino, for your final reflection or summary, or how you relate to these ideas we have just been discussing.
Really, I think it's really, I can see so much. First of all, I really express my gratitude for this conversation and appreciate again this invitation, and I appreciate also this atmosphere that really is, and also I can see that what I can actually see is that there is room for in some sense integrating the highlights of study on let's say on meditation, basically, which is in itself is not easy, because then already there are many forms of meditation that should be placed in their own context and so on. That is in per se in itself is not easy, but then we should see this in a broader framework, broader context, and include also wisdom, ethics, and still also I think see how. Because the models that come from Buddhist psychology, I think, are so refined, because they really are closely linked to practice, to direct practice, to first-person practice. And I think that contemporary science, science of meditation, or insights about the science of emotion, of consciousness, cognition, they have arrived to interesting insights from another path. That is just the third-person perspective, with very really ingenious methods using reaction times, accuracy, really great tasks, inference, models, maps. But then the two with different methodology, one that mainly goes to the first-person perspective, but trained, very highly trained first-person perspective. The other that comes from this actually highly, let's say, refined methodologically third-person perspective, can beautifully converge. And I think this is a fantastic. And then when we consider then life, no, as in Mind and Life, the idea that we study our mind, brain, body, let's say, system, but we study also our life, and human life also include as we said, social aspects, the anthropological aspects, and so on. We really have a universe that can be explored. It's fascinating.
Thank you so much. This was really deep and also wide and inspirational in many ways. So it was a fantastic example of how these various fields brought together can inspire a lot more questions and a lot more ideas. Thank you so much, and I hope you all enjoyed this meeting, and we are looking forward to seeing you again soon. Let me share with you before saying goodbye and thanking Professor Raffone for his great talk, what is awaiting us. On November 24th, in 2 weeks' time, on another Thursday evening, we are going to have an EVA alumni talk with Josipa Mihic, one of our European Varela awardees from previous years. This is a new series we initiated this fall, and we have had 2 talks already in the series. Younger scholars, researchers who got the award and who really benefited from this award share their research results and also their experience with the research project that was funded by the EWA. And on December 1st, we have Wolfgang Lucas here with us, member of MLE also. He is going to be our next guest in the MLE Friends webinar series. He's going to give us a talk, and we are still in discussion about the exact title and the exact theme. So we are looking forward to having you all back in 2 and 3 weeks' time. And don't forget the Core and Action series as well, that is happening on Wednesdays, and that can be followed on YouTube. If you go to our YouTube channel, you can have a check and see what you can find there. A lot of content by now over the last 2 years. And thank you so much for joining this evening. And once again, Professor Raffone, thank you so much for your really interesting and inspirational talk. And we are looking forward to having you back in another great event.
Thank you very, very much. Thanks.
So, thank you very much indeed.